and welcome to Jurassic Park 3. We're discussing the second Jurassic Park sequel, One Minute at a Time. I'm Brad.
I'm Dave.
And today we're here to end out the week with minute 73 of Jurassic Park 3. Before we get to that, Dave, over at Pedia.com we have a write-up on the crane we've been seeing in the river itself, and I'll include the doc or the marina article as well here, because we've been talking about them both for the last few minutes, and here at Jurassic Pedia we've got the articles for them as well.
Mm-hmm.
Dave, you posted up the concept art from the marina as well that went up a couple of minutes ago, and
I did.
Looking here with the construction crane, we got the photo of the Spinosaur just as Grant fires the flare at it. There's a couple other good photos too. I might make it my mission to actually do something for Pedia and add a couple more photos here with the crane itself and see if I can find a real world counterpart, because it's not really a crane I'd see as cargo lifting for lifting cages on and off the boats, but I know a lot of cranes this similar shape. You could either have tracks under them, or they could be mounted on the back of a truck. So I'd really love to see under the waterline as to what's under this crane, if it's a track vehicle, self-propelled, or if it's mounted to a crane, if it's a crane truck.
I kind of imagine that it's a just looking at the design, it has a caterpillar. It's got the treads, it's not a truck. You know, my uncle owns a crane company, and judging by the look of it, he owns all truck cranes, and this doesn't look like any he owns.
But in saying that too, it is very old. It definitely wasn't new in '93 when this was all being built.
No. But at the same time, I mean, he's got truck cranes in his fleet that go all the way back to the '80s. So
yep. Yeah, that's it. Just because it's old doesn't mean it's obsolete.
Yep. In fact, he still has one from the original company name that kind of half still has the old company name on it. So it's kind of funny because he gives that one to his brother. He gives the oldest crane in the fleet to his brother.
I know personally with the trucking company I was with, the boss loved to have some older trucks, just for the look and not nostalgia, but just the look and the fact of having him. But unfortunately, he'd never drive them. He'd always give them to other people to drive, and those other people would always crack the poos because they got stuck with the old crap, and other people got to drive the new stuff. When the boss just thought, well, it's a classic truck. Why don't you want to drive it? Well, it's got no air conditioning for a start. Where do you want me to start? That was a tangent. Head over to Jurassic-Pedia.com and check out all the stuff for the crane and the marina site.
There you go, my friend. Make sure you get as close as you can. I'll give you something extra if you make it a good trip. Hey, I'm gonna get you close, my friend, but not too close, eh? You don't want to be eaten.
Alright, Dave, ready to end out this week and get into minute 73.
Sure.
As we end at minute 72 of Jurassic Park 3, the cage had been pulled from the front of the boat, just after Alan managed to get a call away to Ellie, telling him he's on Site B, in the river. As we open on minute 73, the big Spinosaur is thrashing its head around the water, sending up waves of spray, while under the water the cage continues to tip until it suddenly thuds on the bottom of the river. But before it does, Paul manages to get free and swims to the surface. At the 12-second mark, the Spinosaur lifts its head out of the water and roars, and a torrent of water runs down from its jaws. Paul surfaces upriver and sees the Spinosaur towering over the cage and his family inside. He turns and sees the crane in the water behind him and starts swimming towards it. Inside the cage, the Spinosaur's massive hand is scooping around trying to grab Amanda and Eric and pull them out. At the 44-second mark, we cut back to Paul as he starts to climb the crane, getting higher and higher. Inside the cage, the clawed hand grabs Amanda and cuts her, tearing her clothing. At the 50-second mark, we cut to the tiny figure of Paul up atop the crane as he yells out, "Hey," trying to get the Spinosaur's attention. He starts waving his hands and yelling louder and the Spinosaur turns and looks towards him and roars. And as the minute ends, the big animal turns and ignores the cage and starts to move towards Paul as he sits atop that tiny crane. As the Spinosaur's fishing around with its big head and its arms, it must clip the cage here because it goes for a bit of a tumble. And as it does, the cage door comes open and Paul's able to swim free. And it's sort of weird here in this nice crystal blue tank water. It looks like a can of deodorant or something goes floating by. I've tried to slow it down. I cannot see. It's obviously something that they pulled out of the boxes when they were searching for a weapon, but yeah, it looks like a little can of aerosol paint.
I think it's that silver can that we saw spill out earlier.
Okay. I wonder if it's a thermos.
I considered that myself because it kind of did look like a thermos.
Yeah. If someone's going to work for the day, then a flare gun, a pair of pliers, a thermos, and a torch is probably something probably on the list to take to work. Yeah,
I mean, those are kind of... I would imagine those would be like basic things you'd shove into your little work toolbox, you know?
Yeah. Up above, the Spinosaur is roaring again in frustration. It does love to make some sound up there as it's fishing around, but we get to see the cage come to rest on the bottom of the river, and sitting on that cage door end, and as you were saying last minute, you can clearly see the stony bottom here, which would, in nice sunny daylight conditions, would lend you to believe the water would be this clear, but it's sort of odd here because it does come around and sit on the bottom, yet all of a sudden we've got about a foot of the cage sitting above the waterline as well, which maybe it's sort of, we didn't see it, but it sort of rolled downstream a little bit and found a shallow section.
It probably did, I'd imagine, because at this point they're getting the Spinosaurus kind of pushed everything closer to shore, you know?
Yeah, well, earlier when we see the Spinosaur come up beside the boat, in its appearance, it's sort of knee to thigh deep in the water, where here the sort of cage is, we got a foot of it sitting out of the water, and when we get in a minute when it's sort of looking at the crane, you can see it's nearly ankle deep. It's But we've mentioned before too the changing scale in sizes between the animatronic and the CG as well.
A little goof that we have here when the cage comes to rest at the bottom of the river is you can clearly, plain as day, see a reflection of the camera light in the water against the metal of the cage. I mean, it's just a bright circle on the beam of the corner.
Well, they would have had the divers underwater here with the underwater cameras. And yeah, there shouldn't be any lighting source underwater here. Yeah, that is a little one. But it's sort of lucky for the inhabitants, sort of people inside the cage here, that it comes to rest on the bottom and sticks out, because it means they can all sort of come up above the waterline and get a big breath of much needed air.
I mean, you know how most people try to hold their breath during a water scene, or some people do. Some people, I mean, I try it sometimes. I nearly died during Finding Nemo, but I will admit I did try doing it during the scene when I was a kid, and I could never hold my breath the whole time.
That's sort of one of those things with underwater scenes. Like we know the scuba divers are there. We've got teams with tanks and that to help out. I'm sure this cage probably isn't even steel, or it's probably got breakaway sections. So if in the event of something happening, they can break it away pretty quick and get the actors out of the water. But it does look good, especially again. These are the actors in there for most of this, or pretty much all of it as well. Doing the underwater stuff, which it just adds to the realism a lot. When you haven't got a CG face or something where they've tried to hide the fact it's not Grant getting tossed around in the cage or something. But Paul pops his head out of the water a little way away from everyone else and looks downstream at the massive animal standing over the cage, and as I said before, sort of barely knee deep in the water now. But then he turns and sees that submerged crane behind him, which they seem to be a bit further apart here than what they should be, because we know that crane was before, and we know, at the end of the minute, where he's sort of yelling at the Spinosaur it looks like the Spinosaur is nearly under the crane already, or a lot closer. Maybe that's just the perspective of the camera being further away, but but he swims towards the crane and starts to climb up it. And here we, again, for some reason, we get a reuse shot of that Spinosaur fishing around in the water, where clearly we know the cage ends above the water. It should be able to see unless somehow it's turned around and has its back to him. But we get a couple of cuts here of sort of its clawed hand reaching in through that smaller opening of the door at the end of it. And it's sort of running around there trying to find Grant, Eric, and Paul, and Grant, Eric, Amanda, Eric. Oh, confusion. But while this is happening too, we do get a cut back to Paul as he starts climbing up the crane. And if you got that HD on, you can see in the background over the top of the crane the pylons for the aviary that are in the background of this scene. We mentioned a couple of minutes ago in some of the behind the scenes stuff the fact they're reusing the aviary canyon water set.
I know. I was looking at the shore and I'm like, wait, is that the aviary door back there? And I'm like, I don't think I was supposed to notice that.
No. Maybe a little bit bright with the lightning, or not dark enough to contrast. But inside the cage, Amanda's pretty much dead as far as I'm concerned. Well, she should have died here because the Spinosaur is moving its hand around. It hasn't got any feel in its claws, so it's not gently reaching and trying to grab. I don't know if it'd be able to determine the different feel between a person and the cage wall. I think it'd be just sort of reaching with their hand, just trying to grab it, whatever, and pulling it out. You'd think those big claws would just tear her apart.
Mm-hmm. I know. I mean, you even hear a ripping sound as her shirt gets ripped, and you see blood in the water. But I'm like, but they never, and they make a very, very distinct point to focus in on that shot. Mm. But then nothing ever becomes of it. I thought maybe she would get infected from the microbes in the water, or she'd get gangrene or something. Something would come out of that close-up shot of her being scratched and ripped up by the Spinosaurus claw, but nothing does.
It had a ticking clock. If she was getting septic or something, it had that ticking clock to them needing to get off the island and get to help. But as you're saying, like the next scene when we get them walking through the jungle in morning, her clothes, I'm pretty sure their clothes are all dry again, and there's no blood stains, nothing. Which is just it might be a poor attempt at tension here with them in the cage, but I don't think it works real well.
No, I don't think so either.
But back over with Paul, he's climbed the main beam, main arm of the crane, and he's up on top, and he yells, but he's not really noticed. So he starts waving and jumping up there, waving his hands, yelling louder, and that's when the big animal over the sound of the rain and the thunder sees him and roars at him. And as the minute ends, we get that. I really love this the CG shot of the Spinosaur, sort of with the wind blowing the rain across its body, and the tiny image of Paul up on top of the crane as it starts to walk through the water towards him.
I know. I really like that shot too. Actually,
I haven't looked yet, but I hope I can get a good screen cap of it in high def to post up on the page. But Paul's in trouble. We're going to find out what happens to him next minute. But anything else on that, Dave, you want to get to before we go to script?
Yeah, I think we're good.
All right. Over with the script. Not a lot here. With all his might, after the cage sort of goes in the ground, everyone's trapped inside it, and Paul's free. He sort of looks underwater and sees the situation. Everyone drowning essentially, and he swims underwater, and with all his might manages to push the cage over, which takes the weight off the door and lets Grant, Eric, and Amanda swim free. But everyone does swim free, but Paul's not that lucky. The Spinosaur reaches down and grabs the cage in its jaws and throws it clear of the water, with Paul still holding onto the bars. And he flies about 20 feet further away from the shore. Both Eric and Amanda see this and think the worst.